Hello, everybody, and welcome to the PHLY Eagles podcast. Tuesday, early afternoon. Bo Wulf, Zach Berman. Zach is in on like 75 minutes of sleep. The man is a trooper, straight from Tampa, Florida. We have a lot to talk about as we unpack the pitiful end of the Eagles season after their dispiriting loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It is close to decision time for Jeffrey Lurie as he evaluates what to do next with this team moving forward. We have reports that Jason Kelce has told teammates that he intends to retire. We'll talk about that a little bit, but maybe save the full discussion for another time. But first of all, Zach, how are you? As you were trying to force your body to sleep on the plane, but you knew that your brain was running wild on other things. What were the things that were going through your mind?
Oh, so many, right? What happened yesterday? What's next for the team? Mainly what's next for the team, right? It's hard to focus so much on Jalen Hurts taking a safety in a bad situation when they have all these big picture problems that they need to solve and major decisions, that have ramifications throughout the coaching staff, throughout the roster. Excuse me. So it's all a way of saying that this is such an weird, odd, interesting time in the franchise. And the way football seasons end when you're in the playoffs in particular is there's no gradual stop.
So final.
It just goes from 90 miles per hour to zero, just like that.
Although with this Eagles team, it was more like a pedestrian 35 miles an hour.
Fair enough. But that's kind of the situation that they're in. It's like you stick your head up and you're like, now what? Right? That is the title of the show today is now what? Because there's so much that they need to figure out that we need to analyze and dissect here.
Well, let's get right into it. You are something of a Jeffrey Lurie historian,
okay.
Right?
Yeah.
You have studied very closely the arc of his ownership, the decisions that he has made. You have spent time with him to talk through those decisions. As he evaluates this, and as everybody saw him, looking dejected in the owner's box last night as his team was just flailing out there, what do you think is going through his mind? What do you think are the kinds of questions that he's going to ask Nick Sirianni? And ultimately, where do you think this ends up?
Yeah, so he has to be pissed off. The expectations were considerably higher, and not just for the way this finished, but the way they played. Jeffrey likes to view himself as a progressive, bold owner, innovative with an organization that is, in theory, ahead of the curve. And when you watch them play, that's not the case. I don't think Jeffrey Lurie will make a decision based on wins and losses. I don't think he'll make a decision based on overall resume. I think he'll make a decision based on really two factors: the direction that they're going, okay, and that's kind of the Doug Peterson thing. What's the vision for the franchise going forward? And second, the belief in the fitness of the coach to solve those problems, right? So one, you have to have alignment in terms of vision, but two, you have to have a belief that he can execute the vision. So even if they're in alignment that, all right, we need to make a change at defensive coordinator, or there needs to be evolution.
I think they're good on defense. Yeah, I think they're
yeah, but there needs to be evolution with the play calling or the scheme, which Nick mentioned both of those when I asked him yesterday about how they got to this point. But there can't just be alignment in the vision. There needs to be alignment in how to execute that vision. And that is going to matter much more than 11-6 or playoffs 3 years in a row. And then just to add to this, and this is something you've referenced too, is how your head coach is viewed around and how your organization is viewed around the league. I do think Jeffrey cares about that. He cares about the way the organization, the way the coaching staff, the way the team is viewed by his peers. And so that I'm curious to see that as well.
I have seen Jamie and I talked about this a little bit last night, and that was fun. Thanks to everybody who came out to Wicked Wolf to watch the game with us. He made the case that like the fact that this seems like a good pool of available head coaches, right? Bill Belichick is out there. Mike Vrabel is out there. Ben Johnson is an attractive candidate. Maybe Nick Saban is out there for you. Do you think that affects Jeffrey Lurie's decision making?
Not necessarily. I had this conversation with somebody yesterday that if he were to move on from Nick Sirianni, is it to hire someone specifically? Does he have a name in mind? Or do they do the start from ground zero search? Because those are two very different things.
Yes.
And one thing that Jeffrey likes to puff his chest about.
I think we can agree that Vrabel is not their kind of guy.
Can we agree on that?
You don't think so? You think he is? Interesting.
Yeah, I wouldn't rule that out.
Oh, interesting.
What do you mean by their kind of guy? Because he's defense? Because he
runs like an even less interesting and more 1950s offense than Nick Sirianni. He has never run a progressive offense.
Well, if I can push back there.
Let's have the conversation.
They were planning on hiring his offensive coordinator. They were literally, like, they wanted Arthur Smith. I mean, I shouldn't say they
wanted to interview him.
No, they did interview him.
Okay, you're right. Yeah, right.
Yeah, they were very interested in him, from what I understand. Okay. So that's
okay.
Yeah, I think that
maybe they get the band back together.
Perhaps, although Arthur Smith didn't really run that Falcons team the way I imagine Jeffrey would have wanted the Eagles run, but nonetheless, no, Vrabel.
Okay, this is interesting. I have been presuming that he would not be their kind of guy, but I'm you know better than I do.
Yeah, I keep thinking offense.
Yeah,
I keep thinking, young
I think the
and
Belichick
innovative.
thing is a possibility, but
right, like, yeah. Now, but that's the thing. Bill Belichick, by definition, is almost all of these things that we say Jeffrey doesn't.
Right.
He's not young. He's not.
Right.
He's not an offensive play caller. Right. There's all these different things.
We're a little bit far down the road here, but I do think that the history of Jeffrey Lurie's hiring processes are informative, but I think that this is a different situation, because I think if he decides to move on, part of the reason he's deciding to move on is that this is a little like they entered the season with Super Bowl aspirations. This is not a total teardown. This is a little bit more turnkey, and I could see the case for bringing in a more experienced, quote unquote, retread hire. And
that's what makes this fundamentally different than every other time he's hired a coach. But I do know whether it's circumstantial, because as Shield would tell us, and it's true, they didn't always land the guy that they identified.
What about all the new viewers who've never heard of this person?
Well, they watched the show last week, but
maybe not. Maybe these are the brand new people. Maybe they're Eagles porn or Eagles disaster fetishists.
That I do know Jeffrey takes pride in is not just going after the hot candidate and not trying to win the press conference. These are expressions that I've heard him utter.
But that is a little bit of
that's what I'm saying.
Storytelling. Because as you just said, they tried to hire Arthur Smith. They tried to hire Ben McAdoo.
Sure. They were interested in Adam Gase, right?
Right.
But he looks at Andy Reid and Doug Peterson and Nick Sirianni, three coaches who brought the Eagles to the Super Bowl, and none of those coaches were candidates anywhere else. Okay, none of those coaches interviewed anywhere else. None of those coaches won the press conference, and all of them were first-time head coaches. In two of their cases, first-time play callers. Or actually, all three of their cases, first-time play callers, depending on how much you think Doug called, right? But had what Jeffrey Lurie thought were qualities that could become quality head coaches. But I also don't want to get ahead of ourselves here, because we're talking about the decision that he would make if he did fire Sirianni, and we're still trying to figure out, will he fire him? What do you think is going to happen?
Oh, man. I lean I would say like 60% that they're going to fire him.
And did your opinion change based on the way last night went?
No, because that was the same thing we'd seen the last 2 weeks.
Okay.
You know, it was more of the exact same. And it's depressing from Jeffrey Lurie's standpoint, from the fans' perspective, that there was no button to turn on. But like the specific way in which this whole thing unfolded, I don't know what the case is. You know, it is separate. Like, did Nick Sirianni do a good job as the head coach for the last 3 years? Absolutely.
Yes,
like,
exactly.
You know, if you were going, if it was like arbitration, or you were like he earned a raise based on his performance over the past 3 years. But moving forward from here on out, that's a separate question. Is he the guy to lead the team? And the way that they collapsed would make me think no. Now maybe he has a plan. Maybe he's got a bunch of coordinator candidates. Although, I mean, who's going to want to come work for him after he fired Sean Desai midway through the season? The way that the team just had no answers to the same problems being posed to them week after week, is not indicative to me of somebody who has the kind of answers that Jeffrey Lurie is going to be looking for. What were Nick Sirianni's main jobs? Like, to make the guys better and to get them to play hard. It didn't look like that happened at the end of the season. It's his offense. The offense underperformed drastically, especially at the end of the season. I like Nick Sirianni. I think he is a good head coach. I think he can be successful somewhere else. But if I was Jeffrey Lurie, I think I probably would make the decision to move on.
Yeah, the third thing I would add in there is that the quarterback regressed.
And the quarterback regressed, and the game management stuff has been bad for a while.
Sure. So I am with you there in that I've said repeatedly I don't think Nick Sirianni deserves to be fired, and I stand by that. But this isn't about deserves. It's the same conversation. This isn't about deserves. I think given the way this season ended and the fact that there was no button to push that worked, it's hard to fathom the way they played in those last 3 games in particular, the way they played in a make-or-break game, the things we were talking about and asking about and writing about during this skid were like magnified on a national stage. And, I'm at the game, but I have in one ear the national broadcast. I mean, and to hear what Aikman was saying, right? Troy Aikman's a respected figure, and he's not picking that out of thin air.
No.
Right? So,
and remember, he was hard on Nick in 2021, too, when that same loss to Tampa Bay was talking about how the offense didn't have any answers.
So, Nick would have to have a really convincing case that he can fix this.
Well, make the case. Make the case on the positive to me for why Nick Sirianni should stay.
Well, the case is the resume. The case is that he brought you to the playoffs 3 years in a row, double-digit wins the past 2 years, the Super Bowl 2 seasons ago, that this year, he had a bad 2 months. And are you going to have franchise upheaval based on 2 months? And that there are mitigating factors at play here. Perhaps Jalen was dealing with an injury that affected him in a way beyond, what we know. Defensive personnel, you can kind of point maybe to how the roster was assembled there. But the other thing that I know this is a conversation maybe for the middle of the show, but we should include it now, is Jalen Hurts has a lot of power and sway in this organization.
This is my next question.
And Jalen was given an opportunity publicly to back his coach. And
set the scene.
Yeah, so press conference after the game. And
like an hour later.
Yep, everyone's there. And this question is coming, right? It's not the first question, but the question is coming because in the locker room they just got it. Sirianni just got it. It was the talk of the broadcast. It was the talk of the week.
It is like offensive to the PR staff who work hard to prepare the guys who have to go up for press conferences for the questions they're going to get to pretend as if you didn't know this question was coming.
And by the way, his answer made it seem like it was one of those things that he had thought about ahead of time, and that because he was asked, do you want Nick to be back? And he said he didn't know Nick was going anywhere, right? And then,
which is also again not even the doesn't make sense as an
there
answer.
was a follow up there too. That what's your confidence that Nick can fix this? He says he's confident in all his players and coaches, which is not going to bat for Nick the way other people are. Now you can say, as I've said with Jalen in the past, that he treats press conferences a certain way, he treats the media a certain way. It's similar to the conversation that we had when AJ stood up for Nick, and Jalen didn't necessarily have the same thing. And we said he can say that you don't owe it to the media, and I would agree, you don't owe it to the media, but you owe it to Nick. And maybe the same thing last night. If you believe in Nick, you can say, right, that's not my decision to make. There's so many ways to answer it. That's not my decision to make, but he's been my only head coach, we've done great things together over the past 3 years. I believe in him. Or you can do what Dak Prescott did with Mike McCarthy, which is to say, like, if you're blaming him, blame me too. And that, I think it's a crazy discussion, but that's, I know it's a business. As Lane Johnson said by his locker yesterday, like, it's a wild league and things happen and changes are going to be made. There's so many, Hassan Reddick said that this isn't all on Nick, and that you can't say during the good times and then just try to fire him during the bad times. And then the next breath he said, but that's beyond my pay grade, right? Like there's ways of supporting your coach without, with kind of leaving that wiggle room. But also, you also know you're the franchise quarterback. Your words matter. And so you've said this more eloquently than I did, and in most things you say more eloquently than I do.
I don't agree with that.
But that in the absence of like Jalen's voice, things get assigned to him, right? And that if Jalen's just going to get up there and say, I didn't know he was going anywhere, and I have confidence in everybody. Well, then clearly on Good Morning Football in there, they're going to talk about that answer, and the Philadelphia Inquirer, that it's going to be the main story. Like, you had a chance to go to bat for your coach, and I imagine that Jeffrey Lurie is going to have a conversation with Jalen Hurts about this, because Jalen is the franchise quarterback.
It honestly, it felt like the death knell for Sirianni, because it is impossible to take that answer as anything other than a lack of endorsement for the head coach. He there, as you said, there are so many ways he could have tried to protect Nick, even if he didn't really believe that, right? And the truth is that Jalen Hurts is the most important person in the organization aside from Jeffrey Lurie right now. He is not going anywhere. That is the contract he signed. And whether there is buyer's remorse there from the franchise or not, they have to move forward with trying to get the best out of Jalen Hurts. And if the relationship between Hurts and Sirianni is to that point, then I don't know if there is a positive case to bringing Nick Sirianni back. Now, maybe it's fixable. People have tension at work all the time, and they can work through it and still be productive. But like, I'm trying to think of, okay, take a step back. Maybe Nick Sirianni is burned out from the past 2 years. Like last year was a wild ride. There was no offseason. He had to hustle to get his staff filled and try to bring more energy to replace what Steichen left, and maybe get a little bit more involved in the defense because he didn't have Jonathan Gannon, and he just is out of time. We've talked about his sleep habits, right? Like I think it's a real factor.
I can't rip him for that though.
But if Jalen Hurts is already like seeding out through his camp that he is unhappy with the offense, and Jeffrey Lurie has to do what is best for like making this offense good surrounding Jalen Hurts, I think it's unfortunate, but I think he probably does have to move.
Well, the one thing I would push back on too is that, because I hear you there. Those are all sensible points. I don't believe in change just for change's sake. I believe
I agree with that.
that you need to have a plan for how to fix this. Like if it's just we don't.
Well, I
believe,
think there are two things. I think I don't mean to cut you off.
No problem.
I think you have to make the decision based on Nick Sirianni, regardless of what your options are. But I also think you have to know what your options are.
Sure.
If you're going to move on, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, it absolutely does, and that's where Doug Peterson. They moved on, and they didn't have. They weren't ready for a coaching search, and they'll tell you that they were a week late into it. And they were thinking about the names for the following year because of where they were from a coaching search perspective. I don't know the type of work they were doing behind the scenes on this, as far as if during this collapse they started putting names together, or they started preparing themselves, or like you said, this is a different type of coaching search if they do commence one, because it's more of a turnkey operation here. And you're just looking for someone to push you over the hump. But I would think that if they make a move, it would need to be with a plan in place, with a few candidates that really intrigue them. And I generally don't like doing searches that way. Same way I say, don't write stories where you already know what your conclusion is, right? Because then you're just leading your reporting that way. Don't do a coaching search where it's like all the interviews are a farce, right. And you already know who you're going to hire, because you never know who's going to impress you. You never know who you're going to meet. You never know the vision there. But I would imagine here you need to have a rough idea of where this could go, because Nick Sirianni, despite the way this ended, he's a good coach who's won a lot of games in this league. And that counts for something. Like if
amount of wins.
If you were to hire somebody who
like if Nick Sirianni pulled a Saban and retired right now, he would probably have the best winning percentage in NFL history, right?
Or if the Eagles had a different coach and they fired someone and Sirianni became available, and you had a coach who made the playoffs 3 years in a row and had a top 10 offense the past 2 years, you'd be like, oh, that guy's pretty interesting, right? So now we're in this every day. We see this. We see the warning signs. I just keep going back to, man, that defensive coordinator change really backfired in such a, and that's, I think that's the big question here.
I do believe big picture. If we are placing blame, I think Nick Sirianni deserves the plurality of blame for the offense underperforming. I think Howie Roseman probably deserves the most blame for the defense being as bad as it is. I think it was a poorly constructed defense.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I vividly remember the shows we were doing in March when they brought back Bradbury and Slay. And these were the conversations we were having. Like, what if these guys go downhill fast? And we saw that with Bradbury this year. And then we also talked about how at linebacker and safety, they had career years at both those positions. And that with the investment they make, you can't necessarily count on that same ROI. The expression we've used many times at linebacker, you get what you pay for. They got what they paid for at linebacker this year. At safety, they had some unfortunate injuries, but even still, like they traded draft picks for Byard. That hasn't necessarily worked out. They're getting the type of safety and linebacker play that is probably more closely associated with the investment they make than what they got last year when they had four guys playing kind of above their heads.
Yeah, and we'll have lots of time to go over the specific moves. I think they probably did a bad job self-scouting Nakobe Dean and putting all their turkeys into that basket. I think the Byard trade made sense at the time, but they probably should have just let Sidney Brown play at that point. The Bradbury contract.
The
Bradbury contract is bad.
Maybe you pay. You pay C.J. Gardner-Johnson what he's looking for in the market, to have a 25-year-old.
Or you pay Patrick Peterson $5 million, who's also old, but you're not committing long term. Now, let me ask you this question: if they do move on from Nick Sirianni, and they've fired a head coach a year after he takes them to the Super Bowl, one cycle after they fired the head coach who won them the Super Bowl, what do you think is the attractability of the job around the league?
Well, the attractability is you have a roster of really good offensive talent that's hard to find. You have
relevant to the other open positions,
Yeah, exactly. You have a good roster. You have a team that is a franchise that's historically competitive, right? If you look at the past 20 years, you can count on one hand the amount of times they didn't make the postseason, right? So that's hard to. There's a lot of teams that they're replacing head coaches who did not make it. You know that there's probably more oversight and involvement from the management level than in some other places. So a coach needs to accept that, and you might not get the same shelf life that you could get somewhere else, because if they were to move on from Nick after 3 years making the playoffs, and Doug Peterson 5 years with 3 of those years, or I'm sorry, 6 years with 4 of those years in the playoffs. No, I'm sorry, 5 years with 3 of those years in the playoffs. Chip Kelly, 3 years, right? Like this is not the organization that keeps Andy Reid for 14 years anymore. So you go into it knowing that, but I would say there's 32 franchises in the league. How many of these franchises are laughable on a year-to-year basis? I think that the desirability of the job is you have a roster that can win now. You have a quarterback who's 25 years old and is theoretically still an ascending player, and you have an organization that has proven under multiple coaches and multiple decades that they can win. And I think the infrastructure that's in place is more attractive than it is elsewhere.
I don't know that I agree with that.
Okay.
I think the meddling that you mentioned is a significant factor.
Oh, sure.
And so I think for a Ben Johnson, it is not the most attractive job, and it wouldn't be towards the top of the most attractive jobs. I think for like the candidate, the young candidate who gets the job that he wants, I don't think you want a GM and owner who are going to be the ones who really have all the power and are meddling. I think if you're Bill Belichick and you can come in and call the shots, and you can take over personnel if you want to, or have the heavy hand,
or get the wins
and
record.
You get the roster, then I think it is the most attractive turnkey place. I think it depends on the candidate. That is sort of my read.
Yeah,
I think the roster is in solid shape, not great shape. Things are coming over a cliff at certain positions and with certain things that we will talk about throughout the offseason. But they have a quarterback, they have an offense. But if I'm, Mike McDonald or even Bobby Slowick, I'd rather have the Chargers job, but I'd probably rather have the Falcons job.
The Falcons job, okay. In that job, you have to find your quarterback. I think the job that's probably
I'd rather have the Commander's job. I might even rather have the Titans job. I don't know.
Yeah, so I think the Commander's job is really attractive because you have the number 2 pick, you have a lot of cap space, you have 2 second-round picks, and you have a new GM who you'd be in alignment with, right? And then you also probably have a long runway there. It's a new ownership group, it's investing, and it's a fan base that you're not going to be worse than the guy before and the guy before that, right? So
I do think somebody made a good point to me that cap space is overrated as a job prospect thing, because it's what you're going to spend it on bad free agents.
That's true.
Cap space is helpful if you have guys worth extending.
Yeah, no, I think more when you...
the Bears had all that cap space last year. They spent a ton of money on linebackers and guards.
I don't think it's necessarily cap space is attractive. I think it's more that a tight cap is unattractive because you look at your roster and you have to cut.
Nobody would want the Saints job.
Or or if you take the Chargers job right now, you're cutting a lot of guys, but you have a quarterback, right? And so that's the thing with the Eagles is that you probably have a quarterback. I would say you do have a quarterback. But it's such... Look, I thought the Doug Peterson decision was a really hard one because he won the Super Bowl for you, because he had one down year there. But the way Jeffrey Lurie made it made a lot of sense to me, and it actually worked out exactly the way Jeffrey said, was that they did have to take a step back that year. You know, they reset in terms of draft picks. They reset in terms of some of their contracts. They didn't really spend during that 2021 season, right? And then it set them up for what happened in 2022, and that probably wouldn't have been the roadmap that Doug Peterson would have wanted. That said, I think this one is so much more complicated and so much more challenging. And I go back to what I said at the top of the show. If it's about deserve, Nick Sirianni deserves to still be the head coach. But if it's about the vision going forward and the fitness in the coach to execute that vision, then it becomes a much more difficult answer, and it frankly might be enough to make a change. Especially the way it ended is inexcusable, and it just does not give you confidence that that there's a button they can push, because if there was a button that they could push, they would have pushed it against Arizona, they would have pushed it against the Giants, and they darn well would have pushed it against the Bucs in a make-or-break playoff game.
Well, Zach, you mentioned fitness. It's time for me to talk to you about fitness. Fitness whole bagel in my mouth. Because Bagels & Co. is where you can get Brooklyn-style bagels that are huge. Huge bagels, the biggest in Philly, and they've got a large variety.
You made
usually
Joey laugh.
15 to 20 different types to choose from daily. We've got seasonal bagels as well. They had Christmas-flavored bagels on display for the holiday season, all that good stuff. They've also got the largest cream cheese variety, over 30 different flavors of cream cheese and schmears. Now, they did an Eagles one. May have to retire that one, or at least work on a new recipe for whatever is coming next for this Eagles season. They've got Phillies ones as well. It's also an affordable brand. You can get a lot of food for cheap. They don't want to be some, come in and spend $20 on a bagel, this artisan bagel. This is a bagel for the working man. This is a blue-collar bagel we're talking about at Bagels & Co. And so for the best Brooklyn-style bagels made right here in Philadelphia, head to www.thebagelsandco.com/store-locator to find the closest Bagels & Co. near you.
Now, let me tell you about game time, because I was speaking to my wife on the way over here.
Flex.
And thanks. I'm proud of that one. I'll flex that. And she asked basically what the headline of the show is. So like, now what? She wasn't talking about the Eagles. She was talking about with my life, right? And of course, we have daily shows.
Wait, I'm confused. Was she asking about the show, or she was asking about you? Oh, she was saying now what to you.
She was saying now what? Yeah,
I
the
see.
season's over. Now what? Right? And so we have daily shows, but
it means you're not traveling next weekend. That's a win for her.
But there's a little more time here. And with that time, maybe I can go check out the Surging Flyers, or I love going to Sixers games, St. Joe's or Villanova or Penn or Drexel or LaSalle. I don't have season tickets to any of these places. If I want to get tickets to go.
What about Temple?
Or Temple, yeah.
Okay.
Definitely Temple.
Did you say Drexel?
I did say Drexel.
Okay.
Yeah. If I want to go to any of these, what I will do is I will pull up the Game Time app, because buying tickets to my favorite events should not be stressful, and they shouldn't be stressful for you either. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you, with killer deals on last-minute tickets and the best price guarantee. You can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have. You can browse through the Game Time app and find different events in your area. I just mentioned those 6 college basketball schools, and then the Sixers and the Flyers, and they have flash deals on last minute tickets. Easy to find and buy tickets. And you can find the image of your seat view. Game Time is the place for last minute ticket deals. Forget planning months in advance. Game Time is deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. Get exclusive flash deals and tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And the Game Time guarantee means you always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Snag the tickets without the stress at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code PHLY for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code PHLY for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
All right, Zach, I don't want to spend the rest of the show talking about Jason Kelce.
Okay.
But we should acknowledge it. Now, the reason I don't want to just make this the Jason Kelce show is I think there's a contrast between the things that we've talked about with Jalen Hurts and Jason Kelce, right? Jalen Hurts doesn't tell us anything, which is his right, and that's totally fine. And in the absence of him telling us things, oftentimes people have to fill things out. Jason Kelce, on the other hand, has always been so generous with his time and his opinion and his thoughts. And so the reports that he told teammates in the locker room last night that he probably plans to retire or that he is going to retire. We all saw how emotional he was on the sideline. I think it's fair to let him be the one to actually make that announcement, and we can reflect appropriately when it's the case. But there is no doubt that Jason Kelce is like the face of the franchise over the past decade. He is a Hall of Fame player. And has been a joy to cover and is going to leave a massive hole in the organization from a personality standpoint and certainly on the field.
Yeah, well said. And you know him well. You've covered him extensively. I think I think some of the best stories that have been written about Jason over the past decade have been written by you. And I bring that up.
You're no slouch yourself?
What's that?
You said you're no slouch yourself?
He's an institution in that building. He's an institution in the city.
It also says a lot about Jason Kelce that everybody who has been on the beat has their own
exactly.
Jason Kelce story they're proud of because he is that generous with his time.
Yeah, and I try not to make it like about the media, when he's retiring.
I agree. I think we can overrate that.
Yeah, but I think that he's somebody who, as a teammate, certainly as a player, as a citizen in the city, he's created an incredible legacy for himself. And I use the term he's created it. Like it wasn't necessarily, it wasn't foisted upon him when he got here. He had to earn it. It happened almost gradually. He's been through a lot in his career. I remember distinctly sitting down and speaking to Jason during times when it seemed like he might be replaced or that he didn't know if he was going to be back. And so for him to, and then each of these past few years, it's been, is he going to retire? Is he going to retire? And it really did seem like this year was going to be the last year when he came back, and just some of the sentiments that I was hearing over the past few weeks. And then you saw the emotion on the sideline from him. But everything that's said about him is true. And from a football perspective, the Eagles they've done their planning. It's going to be Cam Jurgens next year. Although I did think the Eagles really liked the way Landon Dickerson played last week at center.
That's interesting. Yeah. Because Cam Jurgens also did not play very well since returning from his injury.
Yeah. Now he might be more of a natural center than a guard. But
yeah, I mean, I believe that Landon Dickerson's probably a better center than Jason Kelce. I mean, than Cam Jurgens. But I also think you'd rather have Dickerson at guard and Jurgens at center than vice versa, just body type wise. Although maybe not. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Who knows? Who's better at diagnosing stuff pre-snap? That's such a big part of it.
But we've spoken about how this is Jalen's, franchise, if you will. But also, as long as Jason Kelce was in there, it was also Jason Kelce's franchise. And there's a part of this too, perhaps not on the same scale, but when Malcolm Jenkins left, it very much became like Carson Wentz's team, right? And so
I think that was their narrative.
Okay.
I don't know if that is actually true. And I think the problem is that it didn't become Carson Wentz's team.
Exactly. Yeah. And
I think they ended up missing Malcolm Jenkins' leadership.
But my point is that Jason plays such a big role in that building.
But he has also said that he has tried to purposely step back to let it be Jalen's team.
Yes. You're absolutely right. But it's also he has such a presence that it cannot be ignored.
Sure.
Whether it's on the field, whether it's publicly, you've heard Jeff Stoutland and Nick Sirianni and other players talk about this, like the amount of responsibility he takes at the line of scrimmage. Certainly, some of the things that he does behind the scenes in terms of being that voice of reason or helping get some young guys along. E.J. Smith had a good story in the Inquirer about this the other day. Yeah, it's a tremendous void for the Eagles, but more than that, it's a tremendous career that deserves celebration and deserves appreciation. And I look forward to hearing what he says. I imagine, he has a competing podcast from ours. I imagine he'll talk about it on that. But yeah, I'm eager to hear what he says, and I'm eager to speak with him about this because, like you mentioned, he's not afraid to show emotion. He's not afraid to be reflective and be honest. And again, this is not about the media, but like I've sat down and talked with him about what comes next, and he's been very deliberate and like thinking a lot about what's coming after football. So I'm fascinated to see the next stage of his career as well.
Well, he will certainly have lots of options, and I think he will be very eloquent about the whole thing whenever it is that he does speak, and we can talk about it then. Before we do that, if you want to go, they might have some Kelce merch, or if you just want to, show your support, wear some Eagles stuff, even though they let you down at the end of the season, you can go to FOCO, because FOCO is a leading manufacturer of sports and entertainment merchandise with a product line that includes apparel, accessories, toys, collectibles, novelty items, and more. It's the best officially licensed gear for all sports and fandoms. It's football and tailgating season. They've got overalls, hoodies, hats, sunglasses, bags, everything you need for a game. FOCO has hooked PHLY up and provided awesome pieces for our sets. FOCO always has our back for Philly sports, and they have yours too. Get the best gear around by using the link in our description. For all non-presale items, use the promo code PHLY10 for 10% off.
Now, if I can ask you about yesterday's game.
You may.
Did you think the way they played factors into any of these decisions? Like, if they were really competitive and they lost 31-28, but there was, Baker Mayfield played out of his mind. Maybe there was a tough call here and in there, but they really showed, they showed something in the loss. Would that have factored into it, or was it just this was part of this whole collapse, no matter what?
I think it matters.
Okay.
I think that intellectually, I would like to think that you shouldn't overrate one game, especially the last one. You want to avoid recency bias. But I also think, like, from Jeffrey Lurie's perspective, it's human nature. And the way that it happened, offensively, the same things. Like the blitz, again. How can we still not have answers? How can we still be running 4 verts or 4 stop routes across the board against a man blitz? Like, and you've got, like, the whole football industrial media complex, like, guys who are generally very... gloves on, just attacking the offensive scheme. Like, I think that stuff matters a lot. And for him to not have any better answers there, I think that matters. I think it really does.
And to be...
for it to be the same thing over and over.
And to not convert a single third down.
Of course, that's and that's you. You would just fire anybody. Like,
second time,
trigger happy Zach.
Second time that's happened. It's only happened twice in my time covering the Eagles, and the only other time was 2020 against the Giants. So, it was ugly yesterday. And then the defense, just the lack of, I hate using the term effort because it's hard. It's certainly hard to quantify. And they're out there putting, they're risking their life. They're risking their bodies. They're risking their bodies out there. But the missed tackles and the bad angles, and I didn't watch the game through, but I watched the highlight package through. And when you see those 2 touchdowns, the one by Trey Palmer and the one by David Moore, and it's just like pathetic. And you watch that and you say, if that was isolated to one game, okay. But we've seen that week in, week out here during the last month. And the way yesterday was as poor of a football game as I've seen them play in a long time. Like even the Arizona game you can look at and you can say, all right, they actually moved the ball decently on offense. They had a collapse in the second half on defense. In the Giants game, you can say they weren't playing with their guys, for most of that game. Yesterday,
I think the order of things matters.
Yeah. The way, like yesterday, it was both sides of the ball. They were missing 3 starters. That's it. Like health. I mean, AJ Brown's a huge part of this, but you still have Devontae Smith. You still have Dallas Goedert. You still have Jalen Hurts. And I know Jalen Hurts was dealing with something with his finger, but Baker Mayfield was dealing with something with his ribs and his ankle, right? And played the lights out. So I look at it, and it didn't see, even though Jalen was affected, it was the decision-making more than anything else. Like that sack was such poor situational awareness there. Just a handful of things in that game when they really had a chance. Like I was going through the box score there, and they had the ball with a minute and a half to go at the at the end of the first half, with and they were getting the ball at the start of the second half. They had a chance to do what coaches always talk about: score going into the half and then coming out of the half.
Right.
And
they failed
both
on
of those were empty possessions. And then
the possession at the end of the first half was that temperature was so bad.
And how many third and longs where they're having these passes to Quez Watkins or Kenny Gainwell, and we've asked about them, and it's like, well, did you see this work against the Rams in Week 5? It's like, come on, I've seen it not work this week and that week and that week, and so
it was so perfect when the first half ran out on that
exactly.
Quez Watkins screen.
Yeah,
I mean,
so I know when a season ends, it's not like you break down the game. I don't even think we broke down the Super Bowl last year, but it's still the manner in which they lost. I can't get over how pathetic.
Feckless.
Yeah. In a gotta have it game, like literally the definition of a must win game. And for that to be the effort, and I keep going back to talking to Brandon Graham by his locker last week and him saying all this stuff. And I said to him, but you said this before Arizona. And he's like, you're right. I got to think it's going to be different because it's win or go home. And being by Lane Johnson's locker last night, and Lane saying, we've tried to offer all these explanations in the press conference, and it's still like this. Like, shit's got to change. So, yeah.
Working blue.
No, I'm quoting him. He said shit's... But I did ask him, by the way, because he said shit's got to change. And I said, what...
3 in a row.
I said, what shit has to change?
4.
So he said winning. Yes. Okay. Actually, my kids are home from school today, and they are watching.
What are you doing?
I apologize for my language there.
It's a daytime show. That's not even a night show.
Yeah, seriously. We were on at 2 a.m. last night.
Your ears.
I could have done that.
The poop has to change.
Poop has to change, yeah.
Let me ask you this, Zach. What's your expectation knowing how the Eagles do things on timing here?
Yeah, so it's a
what
great
do you think
question.
We're gonna hear?
It's a great question because the from my understanding, the exit meetings with the players are tomorrow, and typically, the way the order of operations, not always, but sometimes works, is the coaches can meet with the team, right, and then if he did something today, I suppose he can still meet with the team tomorrow, but the reality too is if you are going to make a change, you have to act swiftly. They're already a week into this, and I know the league has kind of pushed things back in terms of the...
Couldn't even have in-person interviews, right?
Yeah, well, with people who work for teams.
Right.
You're allowed to...
Fired guys.
Yeah,
right.
so, Belichick or Vrabel or... Yeah. So that's something to definitely... that you have to think about. And there is, and rightfully so, there's a process that you need to go through. And it's good that the league has these protocols in place for the amount of candidates you need to interview, and so this is all a way of saying you don't want to drag this out. Now the Cowboys haven't made a move yet, right? And you got to kind of monitor that, but that's a team with a similar situation as you, and so you're competing against them as well. I don't want to say I would hope. I would think that there would be resolution in the next 48 hours because people do start to scatter, and they have to start, your staff has to start working on some off-season stuff. And if you are going to make staff changes, that's a factor as well. So, yeah, I would think the next 48 hours, but the thing is this. In 2021, we went into that weekend Doug Peterson's coming back. And then all of a sudden, wait, Doug Peterson's not coming back. So the Eagles have a different process as everyone else.
Right. I don't think that will be the case this time. I think they'll make that decision. Yes. You know what I was thinking about, Zach, as I got home last night at 2 a.m. from the snow? Remember the story from the 2021 loss?
I do.
They returned from Tampa Bay, and the ice is on the windshield, and Howie Roseman jets off. He barely just covers the thing, and he speeds off, and Nick Sirianni waits around until Zach McPherson can get a tow for his car or whatever it is, right?
Yep.
I just have this vivid image in my mind of they arrive home last night at 4 a.m.
Yep.
Everybody's car is covered in snow, and Nick Sirianni's helping Mekhi Garner wipe off the snow in his car, and he is a guy who they didn't play hard or great for him.
Yeah.
But all indications are like the guys in the locker room like Nick Sirianni, and I think that's valuable and commendable, and a reason that I think he should be a head coach somewhere. But it's not the reason that Jeffrey Lurie is going to decide whether or not to keep him.
Yeah, well said. And I think that's a good point to make, because I think the public tends to see, and rightfully so, the kind of the persona on the sideline, and he does have sometimes too much bravado and a way of acting, but behind the scenes, he's someone who like genuinely loves his players and like cares for his players. I wrote a story earlier this year on a connection he formed with Milton Williams over, Milton Williams' mother having a cancer, but there are a handful of stories. I mean, there's more than a handful. There's different things that I've heard of how he forms, connections with a lot of these players, and that is meaningful to him. But again, this is a bottom line business, and he would tell you that. And there's kind of this push pull this time of year, because, like, I remember, and I certainly would never mean to pick on Adam Schefter because he's incredible at what he does. I
agree with that.
Okay, but there's
what he does.
But I remember this was after the 2011, after the 2010 season, and he was on ESPN, and it was like, they were joking like, "Are you going to be able to break something while you're sitting here?" And like he broke the story of a guy being fired, and he was like gleeful about it. And then he said,
"Right,
but you have to remember these guys have families and whatnot." And so there's this like push pull of that, because I always say, well, this is the nature of their business. And I actually don't, what I think about is whenever you make a coaching change, it's never just the head coach. There's reverberations throughout the entire locker room. Throughout the entire coaching staff, throughout the entire organization. People in, people out, families moved. Like, look, it's the nature of that business. You heard Andy Reid's children were all born in a different state, right? But these are very human decisions that are made. It's not just something on Twitter.
Totally. Yeah, I think that's well said. Whatever decision Jeffrey Lurie has to make is going to, and I mean, let's be honest. Even if he's going to keep Nick Sirianni, there are going to be staff changes, significant ones,
sure.
Right? So, all right. Well, let's just sort of set the stage for what we've got coming this week on PHLY. We're scheduled for like 10 a.m. the next 3 days, but we're going to be nimble. We're going to be flexible. Whatever, if any news happens, we will be ready to do an emergency pod from home if need be, or come in if need be. Tomorrow, if the Eagles are doing locker room, we will react to that as well. And if there's a press conference, the same. So just stay tuned to Zach's Twitter is really the one to pay attention to. And then, just keep refreshing the feed. We'll have lots of stuff coming. Yeah,
what I can promise you, and this is actually not just a promise to the audience, it's a promise to Bo, who's been talking about this for the past 5 months, is we're going to get into a rhythm of the same time every day, where you
at
can
some point.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. During this offseason, where at this time you'll have the PHLY Eagles show. This week and kind of these next few weeks, we have to be nimble because we're reacting now, right? There's
Zach be nimble, Zach be quick.
And then there's some other, there's some league events that are mixed in here that are kind of tentpole events. But there's going to be a time come March and April and May where we can start to say, all right, there's nothing going on at the team facility. Everyone's scattered all around the country. Like, we're going to be at this time.
Now, Zach, if Emily and the kids are watching, I want you to look into the camera. And first of all, tell them you're excited to see them. But most of all, I want you to promise that you're going to get some sleep.
Well, I can't wait to see them. I mean, I've expressed that to them over the phone, over FaceTime, multiple times. But sleep, yeah. But I promise you I'm not going to take a nap today because I want to hang out with my kids. It's a snow day. I'm excited to see them.
Yeah, we made a snowman this morning.
Yeah.
Mr. Snowy.
Very nice. Casey original name. Yeah.
I didn't come up with it.
And then
taking a shot at Casey. Ouch.
I'm joking. But yeah, I am going to sleep tonight, but I'm not going to sleep with my phone on silent because look, stuff can happen overnight, and I got to react to that as well. And I am going to get into more of a cadence on allphly.com and try to put some more analysis and opinion out there as we go forward here, because there's a lot during the offseason that you start to react to as well.
And as Dean says, make sure everybody likes and subscribes on YouTube and get your 1,000 crunches in on behalf of Baldy. To Gene, yes, I will be going to the Senior Bowl in 2 weeks. Looking forward to that. Zach may or may not join me. We'll discuss that as well. So lots to come here from PHLY, and obviously a very newsworthy week. No matter what happens this week, we will have you covered. We thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Thank you to Julia for putting it all together, getting the studio set back up after last night. What hustle. And thanks to Zach for making his way here, flying that plane. Great job. For all of us here, we thank you for listening and watching. We will talk to you at some point soon. And as always, we love you.
We all silly like the mayor.